So I'm reading this book about Wabi Sabi, or at least I've paused. It's not perfect, but there's a story that he shares, that the author shares, that I've been thinking about for days. And it's one that many supposedly, allegedly use to illustrate the concept of Wabi Sabi, which it's a Japanese concept, and a lot of people interpret it as embracing imperfection. And so we'll get into that in a minute. I have thoughts. So the story is a lord, it tells his son to prepare their property for guests. And so the son goes out and very diligently and with great discipline cleans the whole yard and the garden, and it's pristine. It's perfectly clean. And he goes in, tells his father comes out and looks at it, and then goes to a tree, shakes the tree, causing leaves to fall on the pristine ground. And that is Wabi Sabi. And so I've been thinking about this because I had a really, I think, oversimplified concept of, that's, just embracing imperfection. But between the context that was described in this book of the history of Wabi Sabi and then the story, I think it's not that simple entirely. Like it's that simple, but it's also not that simple. So there's a couple of things that I've taken away from this story, right? So one is that perfection is unnatural, right? And also perfection is subjective. It's a construct. So what's perfect to me might be imperfect to somebody else. And, especially when we start talking about art or, creative pursuits, right? So something that I create, I might look at it and think it's trash. I think it's totally imperfect, but to the untrained eye, they think it's amazing, right? Or vice versa, right? Or I might look at something and think, oh my God, that's so amazing. And yet the artist or people who know what they're doing can look at it and go, well, but look at all of these errors and look at all of that, right? And so all of that to say is perfection is subjective. And so I think centering imperfection or perfection in this concept of Wabi Sabi is, at least on my part, I feel like I'm misguided in doing that. Because I think part of it is the point is the concept of perfection as pristine is unnatural, right? So things are always changing, things are always evolving in nature. There's nothing in nature that is unaffected by its environment, right? There's nothing in nature that's not impacted by its environment. Rocks erode from wind, water, etc. Plants and animals, living organisms die, decay, and then, are born, right? Renew, rejuvenate. That all of that whole cycle of life is constant, right? It doesn't stop. And so this idea of something being pristine is this other idea of perfection is momentary, or this whatever we create is momentary. It's impermanent. And so the author centers this concept of impermanence. And I think that to me is the truer root and understanding with this embracing of imperfection is everything is momentary. Nothing lasts forever, right? And even if it does, it doesn't remain quote unquote perfect forever, right? Again, it's going to be affected by the elements. It's going to be affected by whatever and whoever interacts with it over time. And, a story evolves, right? Stories and myths and things that we have inherited from the past, whether they get passed down orally or are written, are always open to interpretation or are freshly getting reinterpreted, right? And you see that a lot with myths, right? With mythology from the ancient world, where we're now, reinterpreting that in the modern era in this very psychodynamic way, where we're applying Jungian archetypes or, this sort of parts work or this id, ego, super ego concept to to a myth or to something that may or may not have ever been interpreted that way, right? It might have been, we don't know, right? But again, it's this idea that whatever we create serves its purpose in a moment, and that purpose changes over time, or its use changes over time, or it's no longer what it once was. So this idea of perfection is flawed, and it's an illusion, right? Because nothing in nature remains the same from moment to moment. And so I've been thinking about that, right? And sort of thinking about how it's rooted in that air, like that element, and this idea of perfection as a construct, right? So things that, again, like that idea of, you know, what are we calling imperfect? What are we calling perfect? How are we defining that? Like, what does that even mean, and to who? Anyway, so there's that piece to it. And then, you know, from the sort of the Zen roots and integration, because Wabi Sabi was born out of a very tumultuous time in Japanese history, which I didn't know until I read this book. But it makes sense, right? So when your environment is full of uncertainty and there's a lot of volatility and shifts in power dynamics, and, you know, what you create or build today might get ransacked tomorrow, right? It might get burnt down tomorrow. It challenges this notion of, you know, of why are you creating, right? Why even build it? Why create something of value? Why create something of beauty if it's only going to get destroyed? And the point is, that's not the point. The point isn't for it to be perfect. It isn't for it to remain forever. The point is to be present in the act of creating. Part of the beauty, part of that is the experience of creating. And this is the Zen monk philosophy that's applied to this, where it's, you know, be so present in what you're creating, because each moment, like, you never get that moment back. And it's not about perfection. It's not about, you know, what it becomes. It's about what it is in front of you right now, and how and what that evokes for you emotionally, spiritually, creatively, you know, materially, whatever, you know what I mean? Like, that it's that being so present with what you're creating, or being so present with what you're observing in a creation, that it doesn't matter if when you come back, it might look different. When it come back, it might not even be there, right? And that's okay. And like, there's a lot within the like Japanese artistic style, and I don't know if this is exclusive to Wabi Sabi. This is sort of where the limit of my understanding of my exposure arrives, I guess. But you know, they play a lot with like positive and negative space, right? Like, absence is part of presence, right? Having so much of the canvas blank and having only a little bit have paint is a statement, right? It's part of that, right? Like, we can appreciate what exists by also appreciating what doesn't, right? What is absent, what is missing. We can appreciate what takes up space by appreciating where there is space to begin with. You know what I mean? So it's this sort of dualistic, it's playing with duality in a way that's integrating it in a really interesting way through art. You know what I mean? And so it's this, I can see why there's a sort of spiritual component to it, because it is this very sort of playful, but also like somewhat profound way of trying to capture how you experience life and existence. And so anyway, so that's what I've been thinking about for the past week. Happy New Year. And yeah, let me know your thoughts. Let me know if this is something that is of interest to you.